Okay, so we're looking at explore number 3 of our unit on ecosystem interactions, and we're in the unit ecosystems. So we're on explore number 3. We're going to go ahead and take that essential question there. How is an ecosystem established? So go ahead and write that down in your notes. Draw your Cornell notes. Go ahead and put your date down and take a moment to pause your video and write down what you know. Okay, well, hopefully you went ahead and hit pause and you wrote down a few things that you think or know related to how an ecosystem is established or how it is formed. If you take a look at our text there in black, it starts with succession. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and start with Roman number 1 and go ahead and write the word down, succession there. And write down this idea: ecosystems are dynamic, they're always changing. Okay, you are successors to your parents, right? You're the next generation. For you to succeed from elementary school means then you move on to middle school or junior high. And if you succeed, you're going to move on to high school. And then after high school, you will succeed. So notice that succession is this idea that it's the next step, right? You'll succeed to whatever it is you choose to do. Okay, some changes take a long time. We hardly notice them. We take a look at the mountains, and they look like the same mountains surrounding Greenfield that you've always seen. You hardly notice that there's change going on right in front of your eyes. Now, if there was a volcanic explosion and it blew off the mountaintops, that would be a drastic change. You would see that immediately. So sometimes changes can be rapid and drastic. Okay, and either case, regardless of whether it's fast or slow, these are examples of succession. Okay. And with succession, we often see the replacement of community. Remember, communities are living organisms. You are part of a community. You are not the last community to occupy Greenfield, and you certainly are not the first community to have occupied Greenfield, right? Before the Spaniards came to the Americas, before the Europeans colonized, we had indigenous peoples, right? And then this history, we've seen colonization from uh, the European countries, certainly from Mexico down the south. We saw the California railroads, and we saw different communities come in to help build those railroads. And certainly after we're gone, there'll be some new community of people who succeed us coming after us, right? So there's this idea of primary versus secondary succession. Primary succession speaks to the very first time life shows up on a new surface, a new terrain. Okay, so think about the moon. Um, we'll say that we presume, because we haven't found any evidence of life on the moon, that it's just a rocky satellite orbiting Earth. And so primary succession would require organisms that could help break down the rocky material into more organic material. And so you can see in our notes here, things like mosses, things like lichens, simple organisms that can live off of inorganic materials usually are the pioneering organisms. As they help break down and weather material, and as they die, their bodies are going to enrich the inorganic material, making it more organic, more soil like, and that's going to allow other organisms to move in. Maybe you get some worms. Maybe you get small insects, right? Maybe you get some small grasses that start to be able to flourish in this new area. So you see how one community eventually gets replaced by another. As those organisms live in an area and die in an area, they continually enrich um, the ecosystem, allowing for larger organisms to come in, larger plants. Maybe you start to get some flowering plants. Maybe you get some bushes into there. Maybe you start to see some larger animals like small birds. Maybe some small mammals start to move into the area. And as they live and die there, we see that the soil becomes even more enriched, and we start to see that larger species can start to survive in that area, larger trees, larger animals, right? Ultimately, we'll get to a point where maybe we don't see so much change in the community. And at that point, we call it a very mature community, a climax community. Okay? And so you can kind of see here in our notes that we have been kind of talking about this succession, right? Now, primary succession can start all over again if you have a large catastrophe. Let's just say you had a volcanic explosion and all the land gets covered by rock all over again. Now you got to start all over, the whole process. And we could say that primary succession is going to repeat itself. But most of the times we don't see that. Here we often will see maybe forest fires come through. It looks like it destroys everything, but within a year or two, you see small bushes and small trees again very quickly because the soil was still intact. The soil was still pretty good, and there were still seeds intact. And so instead of calling it primary succession, when you have to start over like that, we call it secondary succession. Okay. Now, when you have a climax community, we often throw this term called keystone species. These are a type of organism that play a very important role in maintaining the stability of that climax community. We often say that they play an outsized role. They may not be the biggest population of organisms in that climax community, but their role, their effect is larger than anybody else's effect. Okay. And so in your text, as you're taking a look here and you're following through there, you'll come across this idea of keystone species, and they use the example of starfish. Starfish are able to keep down the mussel population along the coastline. If you didn't have the starfish, these mussels would just cover the whole coastline, leaving no room for any other species to occupy. So the starfish actually keep the mussel population down to reasonable levels so that you have room for crabs and sea urchins and anemones and sea cucumbers and hermit crabs. And you just have this ability to have all this other stuff in there because the starfish are playing a key role. That's why we call them a keystone species. Okay. You're also going to get introduced to the idea of exotic species. Exotic species are species that don't typically belong in the area. They're not native to the area. Um, that can be okay, like it could have no effect at all, neutral effects. And sometimes that can actually have a deleterious or negative effect, right? When they have a negative effect, that means that they're maybe consuming all the resources, leaving no resources for the indigenous species that came there first. Maybe they are like a predator. Maybe they actually eat a lot of other animals and start to disrupt the natural food webs and trophic structure of a habitat or an ecosystem, right? So when they have a negative effect that we perceive, oftentimes we call them invasive species. Okay, so exotic species sometimes will be referred to as an invasive species. Well, that was a lot. And so let's go ahead and take a moment, write down your summary paragraph. And I'm just scrolling through the notes back up to the top, just making sure that you all have had the ability to see all those notes. You can pause anywhere that you need to pause to get this down. All right, we'll talk to you soon.